I am New York.
Ya sam New York.
I am New York.
Yo soy Nueva York.
Sono New York.
Je suis New York.
Welcome to DiverseCITY, where we explore New York's eclectic enclaves, one neighborhood at a time. I'm Zyphus Lebrun. This month, as we commemorate Earth Day, we're going to do things a little differently. Rather than sticking to one neighborhood, we'll bounce around a bit on this special episode. New York City has gotten serious about climate change. So serious that in 2019, Mayor Bill de Blasio approved the Climate Mobilization Act. It's a comprehensive plan that's being called a New York City Green New Deal. The plan includes emission caps on large buildings, mandated installations of green rooftops, and a host of other measures. In addition to that, a coalition of justice advocates, labor unions, faith leaders, and elected officials have proposed an economic recovery plan called the Climate and Community Stimulus Platform. The $16.2 billion plan prioritizes people of color and environmentally sound investments that meet the city's goal to fight climate change. If implemented, it's expected to create an estimated 100,000 jobs in the next 3 years. All this amidst the city's effort to rebuild a struggling economy post-pandemic. On this episode, Wind Riders, a win for environmental justice that could propel New York City to the forefront of green job creation. Manna from the heavens, the push to promote rooftop gardens as a means of feeding the city's growing population. And flora versus fauna, fighting back an unlikely threat that's jeopardizing the future of Staten Island's forests. Those stories and more coming up on our special edition of DiverseCITY. Back in 2019, DiverseCITY reported on the battle between local activists in Sunset Park and the developers of the multi-million-dollar complex Industry City. The row was over the proposed rezoning of New York's largest privately owned industrial property, which is now valued at just over $1 billion. Well, in 2020, the developers withdrew their plans to dramatically alter the fabric of the neighborhood. Craig Thompson reports that a huge climate project will now go ahead as a direct result of this withdrawal and could benefit not just the community, but our world too.
Wind farms like these may soon dot the coast off of Long Island due to legislation signed by Governor Andrew Cuomo. These farms stand to be a windfall for Sunset Park, Brooklyn. The neighborhood was chosen as the location for the wind turbine assembly plant and the green energy jobs that come with it.
It means that the largest assembly facility for offshore wind and on the eastern seaboard is on the New York waterfront.
Eddie Bautista is one of the leaders of NY Renews, a coalition of more than 200 organizations that fight for jobs and climate justice. Their work on the Climate Leadership and Protection Act, the CLCPA, in part led to Governor Cuomo's legislation. The New York Times called the CLCPA one of the world's most ambitious climate plans, with a target of 100% zero-emission electricity by 2040 and the elimination of net greenhouse gases by 2050.
That's a pretty big and ambitious target that we're talking, less than 20 years now, right?
Bautista says Governor Cuomo's decision was in no small part due to the efforts of community groups like Uprose, the environmental justice organization based in Sunset Park.
You could draw a direct line between communities organizing on these issues and the announcement that happened a few weeks ago. And it just goes to show you the power of committed, consistent, and strategic community organizing.
We've been working, really calling for green industrial uses on the waterfront for decades.
That's Summer Sandoval, Energy Democracy Coordinator with Uprose. In 2020, the organization celebrated a huge victory over Industry City. The win meant that one of New York's largest developers could not rezone the area. This paved the way for the factories that will assemble the turbines that will serve the wind farms off of Long Island.
We've seen the same things happen to Chelsea and Williamsburg and across the city where industrial uses are changed. That really limits the city's capacity for local production and local manufacturing.
Offshore wind is a new market in the U.S., so the Norwegian energy conglomerate Equinor will operate and build the facility. Uprose intends to ensure that the company aligns itself with the community's needs.
It's very important as well as for these entities, corporate developers, private entities coming into a community of how they show up in the space and how they work with the community to create not only a vision, but a process that honors community-based planning.
Advocates at Uprose and elsewhere hope that the massive assembly plant will make Sunset Park the offshore wind and clean energy hub for the city, state, and region, as well as bring thousands of factory and related jobs to the people who live in the neighborhood.
There are two tranches of jobs. There's the construction jobs and then there's the long-term jobs. I know that they number in the hundreds, if not thousands, when you add all of them up.
Between the city's Climate Mobilization Act and the state CLCPA, there's going to be a cumulative projection of over 200,000 climate jobs to be created in the next 10 years. And so seeing the significant maritime industrial area in Sunset Park as a potential large host of many of these jobs in renewable energy, sustainable manufacturing, energy retrofit, and related jobs.
For DiverseCITY, I'm Craig Thompson.
Local lawmakers are paving the way for urban farmers to take advantage of empty roof space above commercial and residential buildings. This is in an effort to create a pathway for farmers and architects to turn this concrete jungle green, one rooftop at a time. Crystal Lowe reports.
There's really a lot to experiment with, especially as New York City gets warmer. I think we're now officially classified as a subtropical climate, which is crazy, but that does create some cool windows of opportunity for growing things that research from 20, 30 years ago says isn't possible.
Susanna Schneider is a teaching garden farmer and a Flushing farm manager with Grow NYC. The organization was founded in 1970 and has become one of the city's biggest environmental nonprofits.
Our mission is to improve the quality of life for all New Yorkers so that everybody can flourish, and we do this through different types of environmental programming.
One of those programs focuses on rooftop gardens. Schneider manages a garden at an affordable housing residential building in Flushing, Queens.
I support the building's garden club, which has residents from all ages of all backgrounds to grow food together in a community garden on the roof. And we also do culinary programming, culinary and nutrition.
These gardens are not just about making these residents self-sufficient. They also have a big impact on the environment.
Rooftop farms are really incredible for what they can do in the way of ecosystem services. They can capture and manage stormwater in cities where all of our soil has been paved over by concrete, which isn't very absorbent. So green roofs can really, really help with that. They also do a lot to keep us cooler in the summer months to mitigate something called the urban heat island effect, where cities often absorb heat through all the pavement and the dark concrete. But green roofs can help to mitigate some of that heat. This cooling effect is also great for reducing energy use, which can help with reducing greenhouse gases.
But growing food on city rooftops does come with a few challenges.
So one of the biggest challenges of growing food in the city, especially urban farming, is that you can't get access to light as much as you do in rural areas where you've got all this wide space. You know, you've got town buildings around you, shade, that the shade isn't what the plants need to grow. But a rooftop is sort of above that, depending on where it is. And so you get more access to light, which means you can do soil-based agriculture And you can do greenhouses, which are very difficult to do on the ground in cities because you need light for all of that production to happen.
Henry Gordon Smith is the CEO and founder of a global advisory and software firm called Agritecture. Agritecture's consultants advise farmers, investors, businesses, and city agencies on how to create, design, and sustain urban agriculture. A big part of what they do is to teach urban farmers how to do more with less space.
When we have less, we kind of innovate. And that's one of the main differences between urban farming and rural farming is less space and thus, actually more productivity. There's a lot of research that shows that urban farms, because they're smaller, can produce 25, 50% more than rural farms just because of that lack of space and how that creates innovation.
Smith anticipates that there will be a greater need for his services with the passing of a crop of new laws that address the absence of green spaces and local farming in New York City.
I think rooftop farming is going to go in the direction that residential buildings are going to start to allow commercial rooftop farms to be permitted. Today in New York City, you're not legally allowed to put commercial farms on residential buildings. So it's limited to industrial spaces and commercial spaces. Now, that's a problem because in the end, people need the food, right? But I think that it's inevitable that as climate change gets more difficult and food access gets more challenging for New Yorkers, the city is going to have to recognize that residential spaces are possible for this.
I don't know if you'd heard of local laws 92 and 94 that passed in 2019 that requires any roof that's undergoing major construction to have either solar panels or a green roof. So I think we're going to see an increase that type of space and also the programming to go along with it and the successful management of those spaces.
That management would include measures to adequately protect the food. Farmers will have to ensure their crops are not being subjected to unsanitary conditions during transport through the hallways, staircases, and elevators of these residential buildings. Crystal Lowe for DiverseCITY.
Staten Island's 9,600 acres of parks and natural woodland are being threatened by an unlikely invader, white-tailed deer. These deer have been crossing over from New Jersey and are eating their way through the forest in the borough of Parks. That has left the borough somewhat at odds with the city as to how best to address these browsing beasts.
Staten Island was a great sort of time capsule where our forests were acting like a kind of a well-balanced forest from many, many years ago. So the first time we heard from anyone say that the deer were having a negative impact in the forest were from environmentalists, were from parks ecologists who were watching what has unfolded in other areas of the country where there are too many deer.
The problem began about 15 years ago when deer would cross the Kilvan-Cull River from New Jersey and started showing up on people like Charlie Stoffer's doorstep. Stoffers found that it wasn't just his prize-winning garden that was being eaten.
They've eaten all the ground cover, small bushes, berries, other things that other critters would need to survive, things that would stop soil from washing away due to, causing erosion and that kind of thing.
The deer aren't only a danger to the forest. They caused a spike in car accidents and carried the ticks that spread Lyme disease. So, 5 years ago, the city's Parks Department employed the non-profit conservation group White Buffalo to initiate a first-of-its-kind deer vasectomy program. The city reports that the program has been able to reduce the deer population by about 24%. They've also recorded a drop in the related problems. But Stoffers says that the program doesn't account for the fact that the female deer, or does, can remain in heat for an extended period.
If a female deer doesn't get pregnant, she can remain in estrus for an extra 3 or 4 months. So where estrus would normally take place between October through January, let's say, deer can still be looking to get lucky come March and April.
What's more, there are concerns that the program's initial cost of $3.3 million has now ballooned to $6.6 million. This has, in part, led to calls for a controlled hunt with bows, not guns, to cull the deer population. That's despite Mayor de Blasio's and the NYPD's objections.
Oh, I absolutely would not support anybody walking through the woods with armament. I'd rather see the reintroduction of wolves to take care of this. A limited bow hunt would take place in an area that can be somewhat cordoned off. It would take place during a very brief period of time, and it would probably take the time period would probably be when people are less active and less likely to be in the area. It wouldn't be in somebody's backyard.
Whether it's protecting the undergrowth of Staten Island's forest, reducing car accidents, reducing Lyme disease, one issue after another, unless you're going to really wipe out the deer, you're going to be left with some deer. You're going to have more deer. You're going to have to kill every year. It's a seesaw. We've seen this happen in other places where killing just doesn't get you the results that you're looking for.
David Koropkin is an animal rights attorney who has been fighting to protect the increasing population of deer and turkey on Staten Island. He supports the vasectomy program, in addition to promoting coexisting literature that the Parks Department has already posted on its website.
There is a tremendous amount of solid information that should be serving as a starting point for creating, an existence that we don't wake up and see wildlife and think, oh, why is there a deer here? But really understand that they're part of our world.
Part of that coexistence includes reminding residents to not feed the deer. That and the fact that they have no natural predators on the island contributed to the population proliferating in the first place. In the meantime, the Parks Department has sprayed deer repellent, installed more than 7,000 tree guards, and thousands of feet of enclosure fencing to protect young saplings.
Exclosure certainly is a step to take now while we're still deciding on a long-term management plan for the deer. Let's protect these little oases in the forests, right? So that when we do have a plan, perhaps we can revegetate the forest with those native plants.
Burke says that the vasectomy program will continue, and the message will be to coexist with the animals. He adds that the borough president's office will consult with the community going forward, but will ultimately let the science determine the next course of action.
Sometimes in the community, people go from zero to outrage without stopping at facts, right? It's like, no, what science asks us to take a moment and let's look at all the facts first and then come to a conclusion.
Yard and food scraps make up roughly 1/3 of the waste sent to landfills and incinerators every year. As the city balances budget woes and efforts to be eco-friendly, Vanessa Monet tells us how her Prospect Heights Community Garden members stepped up their compost program to help the surrounding neighborhood and beyond in a time of need.
It's a typical Sunday morning at the Prospect Heights Community Farm. The community garden has been serving as a respite from city life and a compost scrap drop-off site for many years before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. Last year, PHCF found it had to pivot after budget cuts to the city's compost project and the temporary closure of community gardens due to social distancing concerns led to a higher demand for its services.
I have to say, today was the first time that I saw so many new people. I was actually getting to the point where I could more or less recognize about 200 some people, not know their name, but just kind of like, oh yeah, I know you, look familiar. But today there were, many dozens of people up. This is the first time I'm composting. What do I do? So that was kind of cool. I think we hit 285 people today.
That's Brian Thompson, a volunteer with the Prospect Heights Community Farm and a member of its compost team. He says people aren't just coming from Prospect Heights.
Well, I think initially people were coming from just like within the neighborhood, but then as we started asking people, I had heard that folks had come as far as Windsor Terrace, deep into Crown Heights. There was one person that actually came from Queens early on in in the process because there was really nowhere else to go.
Those people eventually began to overwhelm the farm's resources.
So we started at the end of May 24th, I think it was Memorial Day weekend, collecting out in front of the garden. And we started with about a modest 40 pounds from maybe 10 people, which quickly went up to about 100, 200 pounds. And we kind of stuck there, plateaued for, part of the summer. But then we started reaching into like 400, 500, 600 pound level. And that was when we needed to reach out and find someone to partner with.
PHCF began relying on a company called Nature-Based to take the excess food scraps that couldn't fit into the garden's modest composting setup. And then in September 2020, a partnership was formed with Big Reuse. Big Reuse is a not-for-profit that, according to their website, diverted over 1.7 million pounds of organic waste from landfills in 2019, turning it into compost given to community groups, gardens, schools, and not-for-profits.
We can fill these toters. They get picked up on Monday of the next day and taken to Queens and or Brooklyn to get turned into compost. And we started with 2 toters, quickly went to 3, and now we're up to 8 toters is about somewhere between 17 and 1,800 pounds of food scraps.
Aerobic composting, such as what happens at PHCF, has become very popular in the city as more residents become concerned about their carbon footprints. The process is beneficial to the environment because the churning of the food scraps allows oxygen into the mixture and creates only minimal byproducts such as heat, water, and a small amount of carbon dioxide. When food scraps are taken to landfills instead, they end up giving off the greenhouse gas methane as they break down because oxygen can't circulate.
I think people started creating these new habits in the last few years of composting, and then it was pulled out from under them. And they're like, no, I can't throw out my food scraps now. I've gotten into this really good habit of doing it, so I'm glad we can provide a service that allows people to, align their life with their values and try not to throw everything away.
For DiverseCITY, I'm Vanessa Monet.
Finally from us, residents in different communities around the city have been going the extra mile to clean up their neighborhoods. This at a time when budget cuts to the Department of Sanitation have led to fewer trash pickups. CUNY J School student Romel Ojeda filed this report about one such group in Queens.
Oh, how did you find out about it?
On Instagram.
Yay!
I'm in the area, I work in the area, I've been working in the area.
If you have lived in Astoria this past few months, you might have heard of a group of volunteers known as Proud Astorian. The group, founded by longtime resident Kate Peterson, gets together every Sunday to collect litter from the neighborhood streets.
So back in June, I kept seeing people posting pictures online of overflowing litter baskets on the street. So when I saw about the 5th post in a day, I made a post and I said, tomorrow I'm gonna pick up trash on 30th Avenue. If you wanna join me, here's where I'll be. And I showed up the next morning fully expecting to be the only person, and 4 other people showed up. And that's basically how this all started.
Their effort is a response to a reduction in the Department of Sanitation's budget during the pandemic. Those cuts lowered the litter basket pickup services by 39%.
With everything going on, I'm sure that trash cans and litter basket pickups weren't the highest priority. What I discovered is that this is part of a bigger problem, and that problem is exacerbated by the fact that we've had $100 million cut from the Department of Sanitation's budget.
The budget was actually cut by $106 million for the fiscal year that ends on June 2021. The decrease not only translated into overflown litter baskets around the neighborhood, but it also spiked 311 complaints related to trash and litter by 50% this year, according to New York City's open data portal.
That's definitely bag food.
Yeah.
These meetups to clean up have created a sense of community amongst the volunteers at a time when the pandemic has forced many New Yorkers to be more separate.
I think right now we are just realizing the best ways that we can build out our communities, making sure that people aren't just staying insular, that people are seeing the needs that one another have.
The group gets upwards of 10 volunteers weekly at their main meetup spot at 30th Avenue. That number ranges between 5 and 10 at other locations overseen by members that have been with the group since the beginning. They scout the streets for litter, they bag it, recycle it, and then they leave the bags next to the street baskets at the corner for the Department of Sanitation to pick them up. Costa Constantinides, the representative of District 22 that includes Astoria, said in a recent statement that it's on Astorians to keep the streets of the neighborhood clean at this time of less frequent trash pickups. He also praised Proud Astorian for their contribution. Romel Ojeda for DiverseCITY.
That's our special look at some of the environmental issues impacting the city. Join us next month when we'll head over to the Concourse area in the South Bronx. Till then, thanks for joining us as we explore our diverse city.